We want to welcome all of you to Focus on Liberia. Today we are beginning a brand new series that has to do with African immigrant communities in the United States. We want to explore ways in which we can collaborate. We also want to look at what we can learn from each other as African immigrant communities in the United States. Compare notes, see what's going well, for instance, in Zaire community or the Liberian community, and see what we can learn from each other to improve our communities. With me to discuss it, I have two African immigrants here, starting with Mrs. Vivian Seton. Mrs. Seton, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for having me.
And Mrs. Seton is originally from Liberia. She's a former anchor of the Voice of America. She's also a former professor. She's lived in different countries, including and speak so many languages. I don't want to even go there, Mrs. Seton. Once again, welcome to Focus on Liberia. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Good. Next, our guest, we have Mr. Gabe Okoye. Mr. Okoye, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. Mr. Gabe Okoye is candidate for Georgia Senate District number 9. Currently, he's running to become a state senator in the state of Georgia. He's a licensed engineer. He's the president of Essex Geoscience Incorporated. That's an engineering company that he started. He's the planning commissioner, District number 4, Gwinnett County. He's the former chairman of the Gwinnett County Democratic Party. He also the former chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora organization in the Americas, and also a board member, Georgia Africa Chamber of Congress. Mr. Our incoming senator, once again, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you very much.
All right. I mean, this is a brand new topic and we're going to develop it as we go along. So I want you to thanks again for accepting to be here. We want to welcome all our viewers across the globe who are watching us. Later in the broadcast, we're going to be posting our number so that you can interact with my guest. So I've said a little bit about you, Mr. Okoye. Let me hear anything more. You are running to become senator, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself that I did not mention, if you may.
Well, I'm originally from Nigeria. I've been in this country since 1981. And I'm from Igbo, a tribe in Nigeria. I used to be the president of the Igbo Union in Atlanta. And I was once a governorship candidate in my state in Nigeria, Anambra State. I guess that's it. I'm running for state senate because I believe it's time that we stepped up to the plate. We've been on the fence for too long. So it is time to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And many Liberians know the Igbo people because of Chinua Achebe. Thanks for a part. So a lot of Liberians are familiar with the Igbo people. Mrs. Seton, I said something briefly about you. If you can go ahead and just add a little more, something that I left out, so that my audience will come to know you a little bit more.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I don't think I should monopolize the discussion, but when I was working for the Voice of America and when I was working in the federal government, people remembered me because they say, oh yeah, that's right, that's that woman from Liberia. So people always know me being the woman from Liberia. So I think that says it all, okay? I didn't leave my nationality behind, nor my country, okay? Did I answer your question?
Mr. Okoye, you already started with your involvement. Let's talk a little bit more about your involvement in your community. You were from Nigeria, and Mrs. Seton, you were from Liberia. Let's talk about your involvement in your community and what else you're involved in when it comes to back home in Nigeria or in Liberia. What are you doing? Let me start with you, Mr. Okoye.
Well, right now, I am not doing much at this time because I am focused on winning this race to the Georgia Senate. But previous to now, I was a delegate to the national conference that Nigeria had trying to chart a new way forward for the country. I represented those of us that live outside of Nigeria in that conference, and it was about a 6-month conference that kept me in Abuja for that long. And down here, I stay very, very involved with the Nigerian community. Like I said before, my my hometown in Nigeria is called Enugu-Agede, and we have about 700 families from my hometown that are scattered all over this country. And at one time, I was their national president too. Let me pitch back to you.
Mrs. Seton?
Yes, sir.
Your involvement with the Liberian community, with things back home, what you're doing, what you're involved in, working on anything?
Well, I'm more or less involved in a lot of stuff, maybe not one, but on various fronts, okay? Um, I think I told you before that my husband, the late Dr. Seton, started the HELP Foundation, HELP being an acronym for humanitarian effort for the Liberian people. So as such, I have sent books, some medicine, and I'm always looking for things to send to Liberia. I'm in the process of sending some stuff. Don't let me say it before it comes to fruition. And my goal is to open a school in Liberia for women, a vocational school for women where they don't have to pay any tuition and they can get skills in computer science and some other marketable skills. So this is what I'm trying to work toward.
And politics back home or the news that normally come from back home sometimes is not that great. I don't know how if you all have any experience. You are here right now. What is happening, and I want us to talk about that quickly, even before we explore what is happening in South Africa, as we can see on the news. Sometimes you look at the footages, the video footages, and you wonder if that's really happening. So if you look at our countries politically, sometimes things are so unstable. What are you hearing from back home? And let me start with South Africa. What's your thought on what's going on in South Africa, Mrs. Seton?
Well, when I was home in 2004, I met a soldier with the UN peacekeeping forces. He was with the Nigerian contingent. So he and I became good friends and we have kept in touch. So this morning he sent me, he went on WhatsApp and sent me a message. He said that things are not good for Nigerians in South Africa. People are discriminating against them and it's become very unsafe. So he's thinking about returning to Nigeria. I think it's a pity because he migrated to South Africa and he liked it there. And he took his family and he's settled in South Africa. But it's unfortunate now because of current events that he has to repatriate himself and his family back to Nigeria. It's sad, but anyway, I guess those are the occurrences of the day.
Right. People keep referring to it as xenophobia, but you see that it's not the hate for all foreigners that are in South Africa. It's merely Black Africans, especially Nigerians. Mr. Okoye, you're from Nigeria.
Yes, I am. And I must tell you that if you actually come to think of it, you will probably come to understand that it's the situation that the Black South Africans went through that molded them into what you see today. Um, Apartheid is just another form of enslavement, all right? And when you go through such, it conditions you, it hardens you, it gives you a different perspective in life. And when you have been enslaved, what you get will be crumbs. And of course, the masters eat the real food. You get the crumbs. So if in South Africa you see Black South Africans still today suffering because the wealth of South Africa is still in the hands of white South Africans. When they see perceived competition, aggression creeps in. And that is what I see that is happening. Yes, you did say it is targeted toward Nigerians. True. It's also true that Nigerians, we feel comfortable when we come anywhere and we aggressively pursue a good life, you know, within the bounds of the law, but we go about it very aggressively because we want to succeed. And somebody else might look at that and not accept such because they see competition, especially when they have gone through such atrocity, I must say, that they went through. But then common sense should prevail. And if common sense prevails, then we should know that Africans are all one. We didn't used to have boundaries. The boundaries we have created by the colonizers. We didn't used to have boundaries. That's why last weekend I met somebody from Malawi, and he has a name from my tribe. And I asked him, what does that mean? He told me, and it was exactly the same meaning in my language.
Wow.
And you can tell from there on that the family probably just migrated and settled in Malawi and, still carrying the family name. And this has been the case in some other times with other people. So what's happening in South Africa should be stopped and also condemned. But that is where I was expecting that our leaders in the AU, African Union, should have spoken up, but I may have missed it, but I'm yet to hear something authoritative from them. Thank you.
And that what is going on in South Africa may be one of those that have just blown out of proportions. But we have seen reports like that. Like we have seen Liberians in Algeria or some Northern African countries being ill-treated. We still see, in fact, very recently there was a game, a football game going on between like the Liberian Lone Star and the Sierra Leonean Leone Star. And even on the field, they try to attack the bus. So we see these kind of scrimmages happening all the time. Mr. Seton, what's really going on?
Well, it goes back a long way. You see, before Africa was one family, if I can call it that. And now Africa has been divided, and every tribes have come together to form nations, and propaganda is pitching groups of people against each other. So a strong sense of nationalism has arisen, and people take it out without discrimination, you know? So I think we should first and foremost realize that we are Africans, and then we are Nigerians, Liberians, Malawians, or whatever. Okay, so I think we have to form a strong unity as Africans. Then these things will not happen, in my opinion.
Mr. Okoye, you talk about the AU, and other, leaders like that. We as diaspora African immigrants, what can we do? How do we, solve not just the issue in South Africa, but do things so that, we in Africa do not perceive each other as threats, that we can live peaceably. As you said, there were no borders before now. Someone drew the borders and now we are fighting each other. To come from one country to go to the other, crossing immigration is as tough as going to a war zone. How do we in the diaspora African immigrants help?
Well, we have to go back to basics. Here, we do not have a strong African association. We have to have one because, the broom, you can pick up a broomstick and break it rather easily. But when you have the all of them tied into one piece, you cannot break it. It's not possible. That, in a way, is called strength in numbers.
Yeah.
All right. Listen, look at what other immigrant communities have done here. They have succeeded in creating associations that are very powerful. We can create the African caucus. We can all come together, Democrats, Republicans, and what have you. We can come together. And if we can come together in one strong union, then when stuff like this happen in our Mother Africa, and we speak up against it, people will listen. But since we are not united, we cannot be effective. First of all, Liberians can condemn it, and they will just say these are just Liberians. Sierra Leoneans can do the same, no effect. Even Nigerians can do that, still no effect. But what about a situation where all of us, including those from South Africa, will come together to condemn such? Then people will begin to listen. And of course, it gives us even much more power in this country if we are able to do that. Because, hey, look at the Jews. Nobody running for president will not go to see them, talk to them. Nobody running for president. If we can come together, we have the education, we have the social status and the economic. If we can come together and charter a caucus, which I can also help. I'm a committee member of the State Democratic Party too, okay? So we can come together and get that done.
Yeah.
It will be a good start. We can begin to learn to trust each other. But right now, we have not even attempted and we are failing.
And why is that? Mrs. Seton, you've been here for a while. Both of you have been here for some time. Has there been any attempt? What stopped it, or has the idea never come up at all?
You see, when people come here, when the African comes here, he feels that he has to assimilate himself into this culture. So he wants to leave all his associations behind, be it national or tribal or ethnic, and he wants to become American, quote unquote American. And America encourages people to drift away from their national origins, their customs, their ethnicity. But I think one of the things that contributes to this is that um, people from Africa are already divided along linguistic lines. Some African countries speak English. In some other African countries, people speak French. And then again, in others, people speak Arabic. And then in others, people speak Portuguese. So you see, there's this great divide. I think we should come together and form a unity, like the congressman said, so that we can have a common denominator and a common ground to stand on. When Africans come here, they are well educated, but because they do not have that force or strength in their community, they are oftentimes overlooked. If we had a strong African unity or association that will represent us, this will give us more clout. We have more economic and social standing in this country. So I think, like Mr. Okoye said, we need to form this association and do it as soon as we can because it is necessary.
Right. And that brings me to even why we are here. If you have a Facebook on, please turn it down so we can. Okay. Because we have to collaborate. African immigrants, so I've read a statistics that we are by far the #1 educated people, immigrants in the diaspora in the USA. But yet, the impact is not felt. Do we have, our communities are not wealthy? We are not really being represented in the government or in Congress and other places. We don't have a voting bloc, as you said. Anyone running for president will go to the Jews. How do we start this?
Well, if I may answer the question, I'm sorry for jumping in, Mr. Okoye, but I think we need to start on the local level in our various communities. We need to have associations, and then in our cities and towns, and then we do it on the state level, and then we can do it on the national level. We need to get more involved and be more aware of the fact of where we came from so that we can band together. Okay. Mr. Okoye?
Oh, yes. Frankly, if you ask me, see, if we're serious about doing that, it's easily done. All the countries from Africa in this country, in this US, they have their own leadership, each one of them. It's a question of convening a leadership conference, have them all come to one place. We can sit down. It's a one-weekend event and craft the way forward, have an agreement, and they can go back to their respective country organizations and present what we have agreed on. Okay, that should be a start. If every one of them understands what is at stake, if we really want to have power, we really want to have a say, a strong one for that matter. If we really want to make a brighter future for our children in this country, this is an absolute necessity. Yes, we haven't done this before, but now it's not too late. So that's what I think. It has to start with the willingness of the leaders of various African countries. They can all come together. And when they come together, things will begin to happen. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing African unity and African collaboration, especially when it comes to do with African immigrants in the USA. Back in Africa, we're so united. We have ways of solving problems. In Liberia, where I come from, we have something called coup, where you have 10 men will come together and agree and say, well, because the farm work is hard, so we're going to rotate. We go on one person farm one day, the next day we go on the other person farm, so that what one person cannot accomplish, the 10 of them can accomplish in one day. If we Africans come together here, African immigrants in the States, in the USA, to start with, what are some of the things that we can work on for our community here and also back in Africa? Mr. Okoye, you go first.
Yeah, well, there are so many things that we can work on. But the thing is, it will be futile if we are going to want to take everything, because we will not succeed in any of them. So it will also be very important that we limit those things we're going to work on to things that are critical to all of us. It might be that we can get involved in settling disputes where our leaders have failed in motherland Africa. It might be that we zero in on electing our people into various offices in this country. That in itself will also be a great accomplishment. Because, listen, let me go back to the Jews again. You cannot play with Israel just because of her sons and daughters in this country. If we are strong, nobody can play with Africa just because of her sons and daughters in this country. Let me give you an example. We all know what France did and is still doing to the Francophone countries in Africa. It's still going on. So, I mean, they supposedly are independent, but that's a falsity. They are not really, okay? But because of the disunity that we have in Africa, that fight is left to Francophone countries alone to fight. I disagree with that. We should all come together. The AU should come together in one block and, and tell France what they really want. Okay? Tell them to stay away and get their hands out and release all the money that those Francophone countries have that are being kept in France. Okay? And if they fail, I want us to know that Africa has power. We can actually place a sanction on France. I mean, after all they manufacture, they get their raw materials from motherland Africa.
Yep.
Well, if we refuse to sell those raw materials to them, guess what? Their factories will shut their doors. And for one time, for one thing for sure, that government will also be toppled. So we have power, but we have never exercised it ever in history. And I want
I wonder
us to begin to know that. Go ahead.
why is that? With all this power, we are the second largest continent. The African youth is the fastest growing population, and we have the mineral, we have all the resources. What's the
Well,
problem?
before I said this here, I will tell you that anytime I said what I just said, people will go, wow, I never really thought about that. It might also be the case with our leaders that they never thought about that. But when we begin speaking about it, then it might begin to sink into their psyche that this is possible. Then it may begin. Rather than asking why it hasn't been done before, let us now look forward and plan it better and start to use the power that we have. That's where I stand. Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of problems in Africa, sometimes political instability. We see that our youth, they are living whatever way, taking these dangerous voyages to leave Africa because things are bad. To what extent have our continuous stay here in the diaspora continue to contribute towards that, towards, because we often talk about brain drain. For some families, maybe the best and the brightest of that family, they are out. So to what extent have our continuous stay here contributed to the problems we have back home that even our leaders are not thinking about it? What's our role?
Who do you want to go first?
You go first. We are having problem with the connection for Vivian.
Okay. Now, first of all, what you call brain drain has been also good for Africa. Let me take my Nigerian community, for example. The World Bank report puts the Nigerian diaspora as remitting over $20 billion per annum to Nigeria. Okay, now that's the official figure. Yeah. But I want you to multiply that by 3 to get the real figure, because that's the figures that they use from when you do Western Union transfers, and these are official channels. But you know that most people, when they go home, is when they carry the most money, which they do often. And sometimes when their friends go home, they also give them money for their people. That's when they give the most money. But that's not captured in this 20 billion. And for the most part, we in diaspora sustain our families at home. Can you imagine what would have happened if we were not here to those families? So as you talk about the cons, let's also look at the pros. It is good in a way that we are here. And it is good in a way that we are here because when you talk about technology transfer, nobody will manufacture something and take the whole formula and give to you. But who are the people implementing those things in this country? Many people are from motherland Africa. And when they go home, they have that knowledge. And when they use it to implement whatever is assignment they have, that is how you transfer technology. So in a way, I am trying to say that let's not just talk about brain drain. Yes, it happened, but let's also look at it from another standpoint, because it was good for our various countries. That's what I wanted to chip in here.
Good. And Mrs. Seton had some technical issues. She's back, but Mrs. Seton, your microphone, okay. So Mrs. Seton, what we're talking about is our continual presence here. How does it undermine or support, first undermine development back home? We see the youth are leaving, things are hard. And our leaders, sometimes they don't even listen, but we continue to be here. Sometimes we are the best and the brightest from respective families.
Well, you see, this is a major problem, Mr. Ja. If our communities, our African communities from around the continent were to have a strong togetherness, it would give us a lot of power here. For example, with the immigration, for example, with how much aid we get from America. America will have to pay attention to what's happening there because we will be here to advocate on behalf of our people back home. So I think it's very important that, like Mr. Okoye said, for us to have a leadership conference and for each nation to elect leaders to be members of this conference. And it will improve our standing here in America. It will give us power. It will give us visibility. It will give us economic prowess. It will add so much to our standing here. And then people will be also careful as to how they neglect or ignore things that are happening in Africa. So I think it's absolutely necessary that we form such an organization.
At one point in our community here in Atlanta, Georgia, the Liberian community of Georgia collaborated with, when the whole immigration thing started and people did not honor President Trump and people did not know what to do. There was a lot of confusion. We had an immigration summit, but instead of having this, in silos, every country doing theirs, we decided to collaborate. And most of the lawyers and judges, they were from Nigeria. And it was beautiful that instead of doing these things, we all came together and we called that the ECOWAS Summit. And it went so well. But apart from that, and everybody was impressed that we were doing that, all of us that were taking part. But since then, it has not been easy collaborating again.
Yeah, you see, when you start these things, it's easy to start, but it's difficult to continue, to keep it going. And that has been a problem dealing with some organizations. The continuation, the life of the organization. So that's something that we have to focus on, not only to start it, but to keep the momentum up.
Yes. And if I may chip in, starting might be a little difficult sometimes, but once you get going, it always works out. For instance, the immigration thing that was done, I think that was back in 2017.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yes, and that could be taken care of if we had a strong African foundation here. That could be taken care of by a committee, a subcommittee on immigration. They can be providing the guidance, that will help everybody, no matter what country, once you're from Africa. Okay, so that's the value and also the need for such a union as we are talking about. Plus, we now have an ambassador here, okay? Arikana Chiambori Koi, okay? The African Union ambassador to the US. She and I were together in Texas over the weekend. And you could see some programs that they have, great programs. But have we rallied around those programs to make sure that they work?
Yeah.
All right. I mean, the African free trade zones that is being talked about, you ask yourself, how can that work if fellow Africans are killing the other from coming to their country? Because these free trade zones are not going to be in space. They're going to be in various countries. So if we are not welcoming of each other, how will that even work? Okay. And they have regional developments mapped out. Now, if we have such a strong union, we can tie into the programs they have and even make money, from it if that's the way we want to go too, right? So I guess Mrs. Seton and I preaching the same thing. It wasn't, but for full disclosure, it wasn't rehearsed. We didn't talk about it before. But I guess it's something that its time has come.
And if you're just joining us and want to join the discussion, we are discussing about African immigrant communities in the diaspora uniting, collaborating, and impacting our communities here and also the motherland. The number to call is 978-726-6965. Mrs. Seton mentioned earlier about the differences in Africa. I take religion for example, where you come from the same country, but we've been divided along religious lines so much that people from, let's say, let's say, or let me give for an example, from northern Nigeria, specifically, sometimes they feel close up because of the religion to somebody in Saudi Arabia than to someone down there in in Nugu. So if we are so divided, the language, religion, to what extent has religion undermined this unity or other different forms of way that we have come together and work together? Mrs. Seton, let me start with you.
Well, the thing about it is Africa is a very complex continent. It's a very multifaceted society as a whole. So this question of religion, some being Muslims, some being Christians, then again, in the Christian group, some are Catholic, Episcopalians, Pentecost, Baptists, and then some again are pagans. They don't believe in any particular religion. It makes it very complicated. And then, in addition to that, we have the difference in languages, national languages. Some speak French, some speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic. It just makes it so complicated. If you were to ask me, and I know a lot of people wouldn't like to hear this, I think like and Africa should have a united Africa. Like you have the United States of America, you should have the United States of Africa. It will boost our economy. It will boost our political standing in the world. And we can still have the different countries as states and led by the different governors or whatever you like to call them. But I think we need to unify. That's this Pan-African idea that Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah and my grandfather and all these the leaders before us had. I think we should come back to that. In the 60s, it was brought about again when they started the Organization of African Unity, but I think it has died down a little bit. I think we should bring it again to the forefront. It would give us a lot of political power and economic power. The countries that don't have certain raw materials can get them from their neighbors. The countries that have an excess of certain things can share it with others. They don't have to go abroad to purchase them. So I think it's about time that we do this, and that would be my wish, and I'd like to see that happen. I don't know what you gentlemen think, but this is my opinion.
Well, I don't know what Mr. Okoye think, but instead the countries are breaking apart. In Nigeria, there's always a struggle of the Igbo people having their own country. Sometimes the secession is always being talked about in most of these African countries. So if the individual countries are breaking apart, how do we as a continent come together under one federal system?
Okay, first of all, Africa is coming together. That is what the African Union is about. They are working through some of the growing pains, teething pains, but they will get there one of these days. I don't know how long, but they will. You see, when we talk about some of the divisions and the strifes in many African countries, and Nigeria for one, with religion. Let me tell you, and you might find this funny, but don't think that economic well-being of a country does not have anything to do with it. It does. If a country is doing well, where our citizens are well taken care of, and at least not wake up every morning thinking about how they can get food for their families, you will see that some of these strikes will be reduced to a minimum. It is economic struggle that inflames some of these strikes that we see. In Nigeria, for one thing, though the people of the North has led Nigeria for the far majority of the time, but when you come to the North, you find out that the majority of them are languishing in poverty.
Yeah.
For instance, the Igbo area, the southeastern area of Nigeria, fought a war, a civil war, in Nigeria, as you may know.
Yeah.
And at the end of the war, money was taken away from all of them, and given just 20 pounds, which to me was really nothing for anybody to survive on. But because of their nature, they worked that and used that money to a point that today that area is the area that has the lowest poverty rate in Nigeria.
Mm.
Okay, so stuff like that happening in a particular region and not uh, um, all over the country uh, will make somebody from a poor area of Nigeria, like I said, the north is mostly poor. They will resent some of the people from the southeast who are Christians. And of course, the people in the north happen to be Muslims. And then when the clashes begin, we look at it straightforwardly as a religious clash. But belying that is economic prosperity, disparity in economic strength
Right.
of the two areas. So I just wanted us to look at it also from that standpoint and not merely just on religious basis alone.
You're right. There's a question here on Facebook from Jackson Ballet. He said, what is your advice from about those who are criticizing everything that the government is doing?" He's merely talking about Liberia, but I want to broaden that. Most of the criticism and opposition to governments in Africa is very, sometimes start from us here in the diaspora. And sometimes that brings about some form of resentment from those that are in power against those that are outside the country. I want to hear your comment on to how, we have created that form of resistance, and then some form of fear. People feel threatened because opposition from those rulers always come from the diaspora, and so they are afraid of you.
Well, any leader who goes into office expecting praises and nothing else is not a leader. Period. Criticisms should be encouraged, but they must be constructive too. You can't just criticize just for the heck of it, because it doesn't look good on you either, which is what some of us in the diaspora do. You criticize in a condescending way. It only makes the people at home also want to fight back, but we should not stop from criticizing. When I was leading the Nigerians in Diaspora organization, when the government does something bad, we'll put out a press release, condemn what has been done wrong, but at the same time, offer a solution of how it could be done done better and how it can be done going forward. So if you do it that way, it will help. The government will know that you're just not there to tear them down, which is usually what they first think, that those of us in the diaspora just want to chase them away so we can take office, okay? But if you make your criticisms constructive, it will be good and beneficial to the leadership and the country.
So when they do something good, do you also write a press release to praise them? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes, yes. When they do well, you let them know they have done well. And when they don't do well, you also let them know they in your opinion, they didn't strike it well. And you tell them how, why it is wrong and also how they can do it better. And if it's something that is reversible, you can also suggest how they can reverse it and then the way forward. It's always important to have the way forward in there. Okay, so that way, when they are repeating the same thing over and over, it's not that they did not know. It's because they just don't want to listen. And if you want to now go on the offensive, that's a different story altogether.
Mrs. Seton,
We must not be afraid to criticize constructively. We must not be afraid to do that.
Mrs. Seton, you heard the question from the caller, and you were from Liberia, where organizations here are very good at it.
Mm.
What's your thought?
Well, you see, it comes back to freedom of speech. For some reason, we in some African countries are afraid that if we voice our opinion, people will retaliate against us. So it is a complex situation. People don't want to speak out. They don't want to have their views heard. They don't want to utter their thoughts. So Africa just has to go through a process of freedom of speech, and people have to learn that when there's an issue that concerns everybody, everybody has the right to speak up and voice his opinion. So we have to learn this fact, and then we might be able to move forward from there.
All right. I have a caller on the line. Caller, your name and where you calling from?
Oh, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. My name is Jackson. I'm the one who's just sent my question in, and you just alluded to that.
Okay, Jackson, your question or comment?
Come again?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was my question, because what I'm trying to say here is that everything, especially one of your guests said we should make Africa to be united Africa. Okay, if a country, we cannot unite one country, then the entire 54 country get to one. How would that be? Let's just look at the difficult aspect. And then we are saying, because me, I'm from Liberia, so I must control my talk for Liberia. Okay, we have the tendency in the country that if the election is going on, if my party don't win, or the person who I'm trying to cast my vote for don't win, anyone who goes there, I should be able to criticize them, to do everything to not be successful.
Okay.
Our party in Liberia, I think we need to come together. When people go into the election, there must be a winner.
Yeah,
and when that people come and emerge victorious, we should all rally to support that individual. No matter, I don't think we should not criticize. But at least, like what the other guest said, there should be constructive criticism in the country.
All right. Let me give my guest a chance to respond.
Just recently, okay, let me just now. Just recently, we get information that United States government has just gave some equipment to the army. People carrying petition to the speaker office and telling the people that this is not done, that's not what Liberia wants. Why are we calling for workers in Liberia? We don't need security.
All
So
right.
these are things we're talking about.
Thank you, Jackson.
You're welcome.
All right. Mrs. Seton, I want you to respond to that quickly. We're almost out of time.
Yes, you see this thing they call democracy. It was started by the ancient Greek, and we're still going through the process today. It is a learning process, and it is. We have to be very patient. We have to be very compassionate about it, and we're still developing in building our democracies. So it is always a problem that people feel that they cannot voice their opinions, and things are done over their heads, that they don't have an input in what is happening in the country. So I think we have to expand this question of democracy and let everybody be involved so that people will know that what their opinion counts and that they are a part of the process and a part of nation building. So this is a thing that's going on, and it behooves all of our legislators, our elected officials, to give the people the feeling that what they think and what they say is important.
Thank you. Mr. Okoye, there's a question here from on Facebook from Jimmy Eastman. See, African unity has been discussed for decades. It is quite evident that Africa will benefit immensely from collective and cooperative bargaining. However, Africa still remains very divided. Could it have been something to do with the disregard for law and order? What do your guests believe are the major obstacles to African unity? Mr. Okoye.
African unity is a threat to the Western world. So they will continue to do everything they can to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it is going to take strong-minded leaders who understand what's at stake to be able to pull it together. Every region in this world has her issues, okay? But they keep moving forward. The bottom line is we seem to listen to the Western world more than we listen to ourselves. That has to stop. That's where we begin to make the progress in the first place. If we begin to listen to ourselves, we may make mistakes, but that is also acceptable because that's what makes us human. But the Western world will always use some of our people to destabilize Africa because it is to their best interest. I just talked about imposing a sanction on the Western world if they act out of order, all right? Because we have the power. We are the breadbasket for them. They take our raw materials and use them, finish them and make money. So all I'm saying is we need to work together. It's not going to be easy in the beginning, but it can also start from us in the diaspora. If we can come together here, we might set that model for our leaders at home to copy. And that's what I've got to offer.
All right. I want to take my last caller. Caller, your name and where you calling from?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Eastman. I'm calling from Washington, D.C. How are you, Mr. Dennis?
I'm great. Welcome to Focus on Liberia. Your question or comment?
As usual, I'm enjoying the topics you discussed. This is a topic that has touched many of our hearts, African unity. And just like your guest said, we know that there have been obstacles imposed by the Western Hemisphere or countries because it wouldn't be in their interest. However, okay, we still need a roadmap to bring about the unity. And to do that, sometimes it would take small steps. So one of the first things we need to, how can we begin to cooperate with each other at in small unions or in different ways. Our trade, if you look at African trade, is always vertical. We either send in resources to the West, or we import them from them. We do not intertrade very much. So then, what will be at least the first few steps we can start taking to cooperating, and maybe something can grow from that cooperation? So what would they recommend the first few steps be?
Thank you. Mr. Seton?
Well, let me pass the question on to Mr. Okoye.
Okay.
Okay, all right. And
Well,
then,
that in a way has started, because like I said, I was with the African Union ambassador over the weekend, and they have mapped out the whole of Africa into regions, and some areas may be the cocoa producing areas, some may be the zinc, different areas. Okay, yes, intertrade will happen, but right now the infrastructure is not even there to make it happen. If you are going to sell cocoa to me and I don't have a way to finish it, why am I going to buy them from you? I will not buy them from you to begin with. So you cannot say, I cannot buy your cocoa. I'll have to sell it to somebody who would buy it. But if we have some areas develop factories that can turn cocoa into chocolate, then we can sell cocoa to those areas, and they can finish it there and sell it to even the Western world can buy it from us. Because listen, we import everything. It was just recently that they started manufacturing toothpicks in Nigeria. So we import everything, and we just and also we export everything, every raw material that we have. That has to stop. Okay, but I think the first step is being taken by the African Union. If they can maintain unity in that African Union and work the plan that they have today, I bet you Africa will be a changed place in the nearest future. The question is, what are those of us in the diaspora doing to help move it forward? Thank you.
And I like what you said, that one of the baby steps we can take is to form an association right here in the diaspora. My last question to you both will be, okay, we're talking about the rift or the division in Africa, but when we move over here, we meet our African Americans brothers and sisters. There seems to be some rift as well, or some level of distrust that we've not been able to actually come together. What do you see as the problem, and how can we fix that, Mr. Seton?
okay, well, Mr. Dennis or Mr. Ja, the African American believes that the African sold him into slavery. So he bears that grudge. He resents us for that. So what I think we need to do is explain how slavery was in Africa before they started interacting with the West. Slavery in Africa was like the penal system, okay? If somebody committed a crime, if someone committed adultery or fornication, he had to go into a penal system whereby he had to give free labor to the society. So when the white man came, he said, well, okay, you have these people who now are in your penal system, give them to us. We'll take them to Europe or to the Americas. So people didn't understand that when they brought them over here, it would be a harsher system. So they were happy to get rid of people who they felt they were feeding. And it became an acceptable norm that people who had committed minor crimes would be sold into slavery. So it was not always that their brothers sold them away, or sometimes it was because of the system that existed. So the African American is very distrustful of the African. And I think what we need to do is to have programs whereby we make them understand that they are still our brothers. We didn't always do that for monetary gain, and that we feel for them. We know what they went through. We empathize with them. We sympathize with them. But there's a way that we can come together as people of the Negro race. And culturally, we can have programs to teach them about the culture that was in Africa, of which they can be proud. And I think it's a gradual process, but there's a lot of work that will have to be done. And once we have been accepted by them, then they will realize that we're all one and the same people, and that they're no different from us. Like when I met some African Americans, they would say, "Oh, this person looks like my Aunt Zelda." I said, "Yes, it's because your Aunt Zelda comes from Africa, you know." So it's a learning process, and we're hoping that it will all harmonize itself in the not too far future.
Okay.
Mr. Okoye?
Yes. Let me come from a different angle, because the past is the past. It's what we do going forward also. We have to learn from the past, but we must not build a house and live in it. All right. Here, I'm going to use an example with myself and the county that I live in. All right. Like I said in the beginning, I was chairman of Democratic Party here. It included whites and blacks. All right. But since I left office, something I'm working on with the leaders of the blacks in the county. By the way, you can check with Bishop Harris. You know, I invite him to this meeting. Okay. I am leading the blacks in this county to develop a plan for the blacks. One thing is, we know that there is economic disparity here, and we're working on opening up a credit union for the blacks in this county so that it will help them to get loans, because when they apply for loans, the banks are looking for reasons to reject them.
Yeah.
And when the white applies for a loan, they're looking for reasons to approve them. So you have to help yourself. It's as simple as that. And I am bringing them together and making this happen. And I am from Africa. The acceptance is very high. Now, I'm also working to get a community center for us, the blacks here. And I told them that when we succeed, we're going to be having a motherland festival. On that day, everyone will wear African attire. And we're going to have our African culture on display, and each group or country will bring their favorite dishes and put it up there, and we'll be just eating away and showing our strength in number, and also educating our people on our African way of life. Okay? And the acceptance is there. But here's the thing, because it's not just the Black African. I mean, it's not just the African Americans. Many of us, because we have accents, we shy away from integrating completely with them. Let's be honest about it. Okay? The funny thing is, when I first told my wife that I was running for chairman of the party, she said, "Are you crazy with your accent?" Right? I said, "Yes, with my accent, I'm not going to acquire a new one, you know." But even with that accent, in a three-way race, I garnered almost 70% of the vote. Okay? And You just have to be proud of who you are. Integrate. Go to them. Hold their hands. Learn from them too and teach them too. It's a two-way traffic.
Right.
Sometimes we come in looking down and they hate it. We are all one people, period.
Thank you. Let me read my final comments on Facebook from Annie W. Broderick. And we're talking about the first step in this African unity. She says, cross-border trade, regional trade, along with the setting up of top-of-the-line Interpool system could be the first measures to stabilizing economies. Well, on that note, I want to thank you all very much for coming and starting this discussion. As we said, those first steps that we name, we want to see the implementation plan and what can we do so as to implement these things that we've talked about. How can we take the first step in reaching out to other communities? So I want you to wrap that up in your closing remarks as we end the broadcast. Mrs. Seton, let me start with you.
Well, we had some very interesting points that we raised, and but we need to put them into concrete action now to start this organization of Africans in the United States, Africans in the diaspora, and we need to elect our leaders, and it will all this force, all this energy, we have to trickle down to the local levels, and we as a people need to come together so that we can have more economic power and more political power, and that will help us to solve some of the issues that persist and exist in our communities, especially as the concerned people of African descent.
Thank you. Mr. Okoye?
I want to make mine short. We can get started with forming the African, I want to call it African Diaspora Organization, ADO. From here.
You got the acronym already?
I just gave, like I said, I'm going to make it short. Okay. And we can get started from here. If the leaders want to come for a breakfast, fine, I can host a little breakfast for them, and that can begin, we can begin the discussion. Because I want to tell you, as Chinua Achebe said, until the lions learn how to talk, story of the hunt will always be told by the hunters.
By the hunters.
It is about time we lions learn to talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And you are running to be Senator of Gwinnett?
No,
and
Senator of Georgia in Gwinnett District 9.
Yeah, the state senator.
Yes.
What do you want us to do as African immigrants living in Georgia?
Help elect one of your own. That is how you empower yourselves. Because we have always been on the menu and being eaten. It is time we be on the table. You can contribute to my campaign. The website is www.voteforgabe.com. Voteforgabe.com. If you go there, you can contribute. You can volunteer to help. As a matter of fact, I'm so happy I'm able to talk with you here while my booth is being manned by fellow Africans who volunteered to help with my booth at the fair that is going on. So people are volunteering, and call your people, call your friends. You don't have to live in my district, but call people you know in my district. Tell them that this is what is happening. We need to elect one of us, because it is always hurtful when anything about crime or bad, negative information about Africa, it goes viral. But when something good is happening, nobody hears about it. Let us set the example by making this one go viral too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to have you. We're going to continue next. So vote for Gabe.com. That's your website.
Yes.
Let me see if I can put that on the screen. So you see the handsome man right there. Debut for Gabe.com.
Yes.
And we'll share that too on here and see, because we don't want to always be the menu item to be eaten.
That's right.
We're going to continue this discussion with next week with 2 other African countries. We have down the road, we have Ivory Coast, we have Cameroon, we have South Africa, and many more. So that we'll continue this. And then at the end of it, we want to see that African countries, African immigrants here are collaborating. We are forming a big voting bloc. We're going to attract politicians to come to us too and promise us all the stereotypes about Africa that some other whole will definitely go away based on what we do from here. I'm so happy to have you all. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation, and we hope that this collaboration continues.
Thank you.
We
Thank
want
you.
to thank all our viewers across the globe. On behalf of my guest relations manager, Stephanie Setro, my co-host, Danielle Knuckles-Guishard, we want to say thank you so much. Good night, and God bless you.